November 2015. Magic Shop Studios, New York City. Behind locked doors and maximum security, David Bowie was recording what would become his final album, Blackstar. The world thought he was healthy, creative, unstoppable. But inside that small studio, the truth was devastating. Bowie was dying. 18 months earlier, doctors had delivered the diagnosis: liver cancer, aggressive, terminal. Maybe 6 months, they said. Maybe a year. He'd already outlived their predictions, pouring every remaining ounce of strength into one last masterpiece. That morning, producer Tony Visconti arrived early to find Bowie sitting alone in the lounge, holding a letter. His hands were trembling. The letter had come from England, written in shaky handwriting by a 16-year-old girl named Emma Richardson. She was dying too, leukemia, and she had one final wish: to hear Bowie's voice one more time. Not through speakers, not through recordings, in person, real, alive. Visconti watched as Bowie read the letter again, tears streaming down his face. Then Bowie whispered something that would lead to the most secret, most emotional moment of the entire Blackstar sessions. "I want to see her before she sees me." Nobody understood what he meant. But 3 days later, everything would become clear. And what happened in that studio would reveal who David Bowie truly was in his final months on Earth. Before we continue with this untold story, if you're discovering the hidden truths about David Bowie's life and legacy, subscribe to our channel, because behind every icon, there's a story the world never knew. And this is one of the most powerful. Throughout 2015, the world believed David Bowie had simply stepped back from public life. He was 68 years old, surely entitled to privacy, to rest, to work at his own pace. Fans assumed he was composing in his New York apartment, spending time with his wife Iman and daughter Alexandria, perhaps planning a quiet return when the time felt right. Music journalists wrote think pieces about his silence, calling it strategic, mysterious, very Bowie. After all, this was the man who'd spent 50 years reinventing himself, disappearing and reappearing in new forms. Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, the Berlin Era, the Let's Dance superstar. Each transformation carefully calculated, each absence part of the performance. So when Bowie went quiet, nobody panicked. They simply waited, expectant, knowing that whatever came next would be worth the wait. But behind the curtain of that carefully maintained illusion, David Bowie was fighting the battle of his life. The cancer diagnosis had come in the summer of 2014, sudden and brutal. Doctors at New York Presbyterian Hospital had been direct. The tumor was inoperable, the prognosis grim. Chemotherapy might buy time, they said, but not much. Most patients in his condition had 12 to 18 months. Bowie listened to this death sentence with the same focused intensity he'd brought to every recording session, every performance, every creative challenge of his career. When the oncologist finished speaking, Bowie asked a single question, the one that defined everything that followed: how long can I work? Not how long will I live? How long can I work? The doctor hesitated, exchanging glances with his colleagues, then said carefully that it would depend on how his body responded to treatment, how the disease progressed, how much pain he could tolerate. "I need a year," Bowie said quietly. "Give me one functioning year. That's all I'm asking." What nobody knew, what only his closest collaborators understood, was that Blackstar wasn't just another David Bowie album. It was a planned farewell, a conscious farewell, an artist's final statement crafted with the full knowledge that he was creating his own eulogy. Every song, every lyric, every musical choice was infused with mortality. The opening track, Blackstar itself, opened with the words, "In the villa of Ormond stands a solitary candle." Ormond, Norwegian for serpent, ancient symbol of death and rebirth. The villa of death, the solitary candle of a fading life. I'm a black star, not a white star, not a shining star, but something darker, something dying, something transforming into absence. Fans would later analyze these lyrics obsessively, finding layer after layer of meaning, but in November 2015, as Bowie recorded them, only he and Visconti understood the full weight of every word. The sessions at Magic Shop Studios were unlike anything Visconti had experienced in 4 decades of working with Bowie. Usually, recording with David was an energetic, experimental process. He'd arrive with ideas, throw out suggestions, try things nobody had attempted before, push musicians to their limits, transform the studio into a laboratory of sound. But during Blackstar, Visconti watched his friend arrive each day visibly weaker, moving slower, sitting more often, taking breaks to manage pain that medicine could barely touch. Some days Bowie would record vocals in short bursts, 10 minutes at a time, because standing at the microphone for longer exhausted him completely. Between takes, he'd sit in the lounge, breathing carefully, gathering strength for the next performance. The jazz musicians Bowie had hired for the album, the young players he'd discovered and wanted to feature, didn't know how sick he was. They thought his subdued energy was an artistic choice, a mature restraint, the wisdom of an elder statesman giving space to younger talents. Only Visconti knew the truth, carrying the weight of that secret through every session, watching his friend pour the last reserves of his life into these final songs. The letter arrived on November 9th. Visconti remembered the date precisely because it was the same day they recorded the saxophone solo on Blackstar, Donny McCaslin's haunting cry over Bowie's whispered vocals. The studio assistant brought in the mail during a break, the usual stack of fan letters, business correspondence, industry notices. Bowie's management filtered most fan mail before it reached him, especially during this period when he'd requested maximum privacy. But this letter had been marked urgent by the London office, forwarded with a note from his longtime assistant Coco Schwab. "David, I think you should read this one personally." The envelope was simple, inexpensive stationery, addressed in handwriting that wavered and trembled, the letters formed by someone whose hands shook with weakness or medication or both. Inside, 3 pages, written in the same unsteady script, from a girl named Emma Richardson in Hampshire, England. Visconti was adjusting levels on the mixing board when he heard Bowie make a sound, a sharp intake of breath like he'd been struck. Looking up, he saw David reading the letter, his face completely still except for tears beginning to stream down his cheeks. In 40 years of friendship and collaboration, Visconti had seen Bowie cry exactly twice before, once when John Lennon was murdered in 1980, and once when the cancer diagnosis was confirmed in 2014. This was the 3rd time. Visconti immediately stood, crossed to his friend, put a hand on his shoulder. "David, what is it?" Bowie couldn't speak at first. He simply handed over the letter, waiting while Visconti read Emma's words, written in that shaking hand, telling her story with the kind of raw honesty that only comes from someone who has nothing left to lose. Emma Richardson was 14 when the headaches started. At first, her parents assumed it was typical teenage stress. School pressures, exam anxiety, the normal turbulence of adolescence. But the headaches grew worse, accompanied by fatigue so profound that Emma would come home from school and sleep for 12 hours straight. Then came the bruising, dark purple marks appearing on her arms and legs from the slightest contact, and the nosebleeds that wouldn't stop. Her mother took her to the GP in March 2013, expecting perhaps a vitamin deficiency, maybe anemia, something easily corrected with supplements and dietary changes. Instead, blood tests revealed catastrophically low platelet counts and the presence of abnormal white blood cells. Emma was rushed to Southampton General Hospital's oncology unit, where doctors confirmed what the numbers already suggested: acute lymphoblastic leukemia, an aggressive cancer of the blood and bone marrow. At 14 years old, Emma Richardson was fighting for her life. The treatment was brutal. Chemotherapy, radiation, endless hospital stays that turned months into a blur of sterile rooms and beeping machines, and nausea so severe she couldn't remember what normal eating felt like. But Emma fought. She endured every treatment, every side effect, every terrifying moment when her blood counts dropped so low that a simple infection could kill her. Her parents watched their vibrant, artistic daughter transform into a bald, skeletal warrior, clinging to life with determination that broke their hearts even as it inspired them. Through it all, one thing kept Emma anchored: music. Specifically David Bowie's music. Her father had been a Bowie fan since the Ziggy Stardust days, and Emma had grown up with those albums playing in the house. Space Oddity, Life on Mars, Heroes. These songs became the soundtrack of her childhood. But during her illness they became something more: a lifeline. A connection to something beyond the hospital walls, a reminder that beauty and strangeness and transformation were possible even in the darkest moments. In early 2015, during a particularly difficult round of treatment, Emma discovered something that would change everything. Scrolling through music forums during one of her sleepless hospital nights, she stumbled across rumors of new David Bowie recordings. Nobody knew details, but someone claimed to have heard demo tracks, described sounds unlike anything Bowie had done before. Darker, jazzier, more experimental. Emma became obsessed with finding these rumors, following threads across obscure websites, reading speculation from fans who claimed to have insider knowledge. Then, in October 2015, she found it: a leaked 40-second clip, poor quality audio recorded on someone's phone in a studio somewhere, of Bowie's voice singing words she'd never heard. "I'm a black star, I'm a black star." The music was haunting, saxophone wailing over drums that sounded like a funeral march, and Bowie's voice, older now, more fragile than she remembered, singing about mortality and transformation and endings. Emma listened to those 40 seconds hundreds of times. She didn't know why, couldn't explain the feeling, but something in that fragment of song spoke directly to her situation. Later, She would write in her letter to Bowie, "I heard those leaked seconds of Blackstar, and I knew you understood what it feels like. The ending, the transformation, the fear and the acceptance mixing together. It sounded like someone who knew their time was limited, someone making peace with the inevitable. It sounded like me." By October 2015, Emma's doctors had delivered their own devastating news. The leukemia was no longer responding to treatment. They'd tried everything, multiple rounds of chemotherapy, different drug combinations, even a bone marrow transplant from her younger brother. Nothing worked. The cancer adapted, evolved, persisted. Emma's oncologist sat with her family in a small consultation room and spoke the words nobody wanted to hear: "We've run out of options. At this point, we're looking at palliative care, making Emma as comfortable as possible for the time she has left." When Emma asked how long, the doctor hesitated, then said maybe 6 months, maybe less. Emma's mother, Sarah Richardson, was a practical woman who'd spent 2 years becoming an expert in leukemia treatment, research trials, experimental therapies, anything that might save her daughter. But when the doctors said there was nothing more to be done, Sarah felt something break inside her. The fight was over. Now came the unbearable task of helping her daughter prepare for death. Organizations like Make-A-Wish Foundation reached out, gently explaining that they could help fulfill final wishes for terminally ill children. Did Emma want to go somewhere special, meet someone famous, experience something she'd always dreamed of? Sarah sat with Emma in her hospital room, surrounded by get-well cards and photographs and the small comforts of a life being lived in medical confinement, and asked, "If you could have one thing, anything at all, what would it be?" Emma didn't hesitate. "I want to meet David Bowie. I want to hear him sing. Just once, in person. Not a recording. Him, real." Sarah's heart sank. Of all the wishes her daughter could have named, this might be the most impossible. Bowie was famously private, hadn't toured in years, rarely made public appearances, and certainly didn't do meet and greets with fans, even dying ones. But Sarah had spent 2 years fighting impossible odds. She wasn't going to stop now. She wrote a letter, pouring every ounce of a mother's desperation onto the page, explaining Emma's condition, her love for Bowie's music, the connection she felt to those leaked seconds of Blackstar, the fact that she was 16 years old and dying, and wanted only to meet the artist who'd given her comfort in her darkest hours. Sarah sent the letter everywhere: Bowie's management company, his record label, fan clubs, music journalists, anyone who might conceivably have a connection to the man himself. Days passed, then weeks. No response. Sarah tried again. Different addresses, different contacts, each letter a little more urgent, a little more raw. Still nothing. Emma grew weaker. The doctors adjusted her pain medication, talked about hospice care, gently suggested that the family should start thinking about final arrangements. November 10th, 7:30 in the morning. Sarah Richardson was in the hospital cafeteria, forcing herself to eat toast she couldn't taste, when her mobile phone rang. Unknown number, international code. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was spam or a wrong number, but something made her accept the call. The voice on the other end was American, male, older. "Mrs. Richardson? My name is Tony Visconti. I'm a record producer. I work with David Bowie." Sarah stood up so fast her chair fell over, her heart suddenly pounding. "I received your letters," Visconti continued. "David read your daughter's letter yesterday. Mrs. Richardson, I need to ask you something very important. Can Emma travel? Is she physically able to fly to New York?" Sarah's mind went blank. I don't? What are you asking?" Visconti's voice was gentle but urgent. "David wants to meet Emma, in person, at the studio where we're recording, but we need to make this happen soon. I can't explain everything over the phone, but please trust me when I say the timing is critical, for both of them." Sarah felt the world tilt. "Are you saying David Bowie wants to meet my daughter?" "Yes," Visconti said simply, "but there are conditions. This can't be publicized. No media, no photographs for publication, no social media posts. David is very serious about his privacy right now, and this needs to be something private, something special just for Emma. Can you accept those terms?" Sarah was crying now, standing in the hospital cafeteria with toast crumbs on her shirt and tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course, anything. When? How soon can you be in New York?" Visconti asked. Sarah thought frantically about Emma's condition, the medications, the medical clearance they'd need, the logistics of traveling with a terminal patient. "Maybe a week? 10 days? I'll have my office arrange everything," Visconti said. "Flights, accommodation, medical support during travel. Don't worry about costs. Just get Emma here. And Mrs. Richardson? Yes? Don't tell her why you're coming to New York. Tell her it's a trip, a chance to see the city, whatever you need to say. But don't tell her about David. He wants it to be a surprise. He has something very specific planned. November 18th, 2015. Emma Richardson arrived at JFK Airport in a wheelchair, wrapped in blankets despite the climate-controlled terminal, her mother pushing her through customs while her father managed their luggage. Emma was confused about the trip. Her parents had told her they wanted to give her a chance to see New York before she couldn't travel anymore, to have one adventure together as a family, to make memories in the time remaining. It seemed sudden, unexplained, but Emma was too tired to question it deeply. The flight from London had exhausted her completely. Every movement required enormous effort. Her blood counts were dangerously low. The doctors at Southampton General had been reluctant to clear her for international travel, warning that infection risk was severe, that if something went wrong in New York she might not survive the flight back. But Sarah Richardson had begged, pleaded, explained that this trip was essential even if she couldn't say why, and eventually the medical team relented, providing detailed care instructions and emergency contacts in the United States. A car was waiting for them at the airport, arranged by Visconti's office. The driver took them to a small hotel in the East Village. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place where Emma could rest. For 2 days, they stayed in that hotel while Sarah coordinated with Visconti, waiting for the call that would tell them when to come to the studio. Emma slept most of that time, waking occasionally to look out the window at New York streets, to eat small amounts of soup her mother ordered from room service, to take her medications. She seemed content, grateful for the trip even if she didn't fully understand its purpose. On the evening of November 19th, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Visconti. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., address below. Come to the side entrance. Someone will meet you. Sarah read the message 3 times, her hands shaking. This was really happening. Tomorrow, her dying daughter would meet David Bowie. November 20th. The car dropped them at a nondescript building in Soho, brick facade with no obvious signage, just an address number and a side door painted dark green. Sarah helped Emma out of the car, supporting her daughter's weight as they approached the entrance. Before Sarah could knock, the door opened. Tony Visconti stood there, a tall man with kind eyes and silver hair, wearing jeans and a worn sweater that suggested countless hours in recording studios. Sarah? Emma? They nodded, suddenly speechless. Visconti smiled. Come in. Welcome to Magic Shop Studios. David's waiting for you. He guided them down a narrow hallway, past gold and platinum records on the walls, past rooms filled with equipment and instruments, to a lounge area with comfortable couches and soft lighting. Wait here, Visconti said gently. I'm going to get David. Emma, are you comfortable? Do you need anything? Emma shook her head, eyes wide, still not understanding what was happening. Visconti disappeared through another door. The wait was maybe 30 seconds, but felt like an eternity. Sarah held Emma's hand, both of them silent, the only sound Emma's labored breathing and the distant hum of air conditioning. Then the door opened again, and David Bowie walked in. Emma made a sound, a small gasp, her free hand flying to her mouth. Bowie looked older than his photographs, thinner, moving carefully like someone managing pain. He wore simple black clothing, his hair gray now, his famous mismatched eyes focused entirely on Emma. When he spoke, his voice was soft, British accent still clear after decades in New York. Hello, Emma. I'm David. I'm so glad you could come. He sat down on the couch across from them, not rushing, giving Emma time to process this impossible moment. Emma couldn't speak. She just stared, tears beginning to flow, her mother's hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt. Bowie smiled, that famous gentle smile that had charmed the world for 50 years. I read your letter, he said, every word, multiple times, and I wanted to meet you because I think we understand something similar, don't we? What happened in that studio lounge over the next 3 hours remained private for years, known only to the 4 people present, David Bowie, Emma Richardson, Sarah Richardson, and Tony Visconti, who stayed in the room but remained silent, bearing witness to something extraordinary. Emma would later share some details, carefully, respectfully, honoring Bowie's request for privacy but also feeling that the world deserved to know who he truly was in those final months. The conversation began with music. Bowie asked Emma about her favorite songs, which albums had meant the most to her, what she heard in the music that resonated with her experience. Emma, gradually finding her voice despite the shock and awe, talked about Heroes, how the song's message about transcendence and hope in impossible circumstances had sustained her through treatment. She talked about Space Oddity, Major Tom floating in his tin can, alone but somehow serene, accepting his fate among the stars. Bowie listened intently, nodding, sometimes closing his eyes as Emma described what his music meant to her. Then Bowie began to talk about Blackstar. He told Emma things he hadn't told anyone else, couldn't tell anyone else because the album's true meaning was still secret, still hidden from a world that thought he was healthy and immortal. He explained that every song on the album was about endings and transformations, about facing mortality with consciousness and intention, about turning death itself into art. The doctors gave me 18 months, he said quietly. That was in 2014. I decided to use that time to create one final work, something that would explain how I feel about leaving, about ending, about the transformation from life to whatever comes next. Blackstar is my farewell, but nobody knows that yet. The album comes out in January, on my birthday. And then, he paused, looking directly at Emma. Well, then the world will understand. But Emma, you understand now. You understood from those leaked seconds you heard. Because you're on the same journey. Emma was crying openly now, but she managed to speak. When I heard those 40 seconds, I knew. I couldn't explain how, but I knew you were singing about death. Real death. Not metaphorical. And it wasn't scary. It was beautiful. Sad but beautiful. Boom reached across the space between them and took Emma's hand. That's exactly right. Sad but beautiful. That's what I've been trying to capture. Death doesn't have to be terrifying. It can be another transformation. Like all the transformations I've performed throughout my career. Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, all the characters and changes and reinventions. Death is just the final one. The last transformation. From David Bowie to whatever comes next. They sat like that for a long moment. Two people at the end of their lives, holding hands across a coffee table in a recording studio in New York, understanding each other in a way that nobody else could. After they'd talked for over an hour, Boom said he had something he wanted to do. If Emma felt strong enough. I want to play you some of Blackstar. Not the leaked bits. The finished tracks. Songs nobody has heard except Tony and the musicians who recorded them. Would you like that? Emma's eyes went wide. Really? You'd do that? Boom smiled. I'd be honored. He stood slowly, offering his hand to help Emma up. Together, moving at a pace that accommodated both their weakened bodies, they walked to the main recording studio. The room was impressive. State-of-the-art equipment surrounding a central mixing console. Speakers mounted perfectly for optimal acoustics, instruments in various stands and cases around the perimeter. Visconti had already prepared everything. He gestured Emma to the sweet spot, the chair positioned exactly where the sound would be most perfect. Boom sat next to her. Sarah stayed by the door watching, hardly breathing. Visconti pressed play. The opening notes of Blackstar filled the room. But this wasn't the leaked fragment Emma had heard. This was the complete song. 7 minutes and 39 seconds of David Bowie's final masterpiece. The saxophone wailed. The drums marched like a funeral procession. And Bowie's voice, intimate and strange, sang about villas and candles and being a black star. Emma listened with complete focus, tears streaming down her face, while next to her, the man who'd created this music watched her reaction with equal intensity. When the song ended, Bowie let the silence hold for a moment, then said softly, "What did you hear?" Emma struggled to find words adequate to the experience. "I heard someone saying goodbye, but not sadly. Like you've accepted it, made peace with it, turned it into something meaningful, into art." Bowie nodded slowly. "Yes, that's exactly what I've tried to do. And Emma, that's what you're doing too. Living your final chapter with consciousness and courage, that's its own kind of art." They listened to 3 more tracks from Blackstar that afternoon. Lazarus, with its haunting opening line, "Look up here, I'm in heaven." Dollar Days, melancholy and reflective, about running out of time. And I Can't Give Everything Away, which would later be recognized as Bowie's final musical statement, the last song on his last album, a meditation on secrets and mysteries and things that must remain unexpressed. After each song, they talked. Bowie explained musical choices, lyrical meanings, the process of creating while dying. Emma shared her own experiences with mortality, the strange clarity that comes from knowing your time is limited, the way it makes everything more precious and more meaningless simultaneously. It was a conversation between two artists, because that's what Bowie recognized in Emma. Not just a dying fan, but someone creating art from their own ending, even if that art was simply the way she chose to live her final days with dignity and awareness. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Emma was clearly exhausted. The travel, the excitement, the emotional intensity of the meeting had drained what little energy she possessed. Boom noticed immediately. "You should rest," he said gently. "I've kept you too long." But before they left, Boom asked if they could take a photograph, just one, for Emma to keep, not for publication, not for the world, just for her. A private memory of this private moment. Sarah retrieved her phone, hands shaking, and Boom sat next to Emma on the studio couch, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling despite the sadness both carried. Click. The photograph captured two people who understood each other perfectly, connected across differences of age and fame and circumstance by the shared experience of approaching death with open eyes. That photograph would remain private until after both their deaths, when Sarah finally shared it with a documentary filmmaker, believing the world deserved to see the compassion and humanity David Bowie showed in his final months. Before they said goodbye, Bowie gave Emma a gift. It was a CD, handwritten label reading Blackstar, pre-release copy, for Emma. The album wouldn't be released until January 8, 2016, Bowie's 69th birthday, still weeks away. "This is yours," Bowie said. "The only advance copy I'm giving to anyone. Listen to it as many times as you want. Let it keep you company. And know that when you listen, I'm there with you, another person on the same journey, finding beauty in the ending." Emma held the CD like it was made of glass, precious beyond measure. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For the music, for today, for understanding." Bowie hugged her gently, carefully, aware of her fragility. "Thank you, Emma, for your letter, for reminding me why I make music, for being brave enough to reach out. This meeting meant as much to me as it did to you, perhaps more." Emma Richardson returned to England on November 22, 2015. The trip had exhausted her severely. Within days of arriving home, she was readmitted to Southampton General Hospital, her condition deteriorating rapidly. But she had the CD. She listened to Blackstar every day, sometimes multiple times, the songs becoming the soundtrack to her final weeks. Her parents, her younger brother, her closest friends would sit with her in the hospital room, and she'd play them Bowie's final album, explaining what each song meant, sharing the conversation she'd had with Bowie about mortality and art and transformation. She died on December 31, 2015, surrounded by family, Lazarus playing softly in the background. She was 16 years old. Her mother Sarah would later say that the meeting with Bowie gave Emma something invaluable in her final days: validation, connection, the sense that her experience mattered, that someone she admired understood her journey. Emma died peacefully, without fear, accepting the transformation that was coming, just like Bowie had taught her. David Bowie released Blackstar on January 8, 2016, his 69th birthday. The album was immediately recognized as a masterpiece, critics praising its experimental sound, its dark themes, its artistic courage, but nobody knew yet that it was a planned farewell. The world still believed Bowie was healthy, assumed this was simply another reinvention, another unexpected direction from an artist who'd spent his career defying expectations. Then, on January 10th, 2 days after Blackstar's release, David Bowie died at his home in New York, surrounded by his family. The announcement shocked the world. He'd kept his illness completely secret, even from most of his friends and collaborators. The 18-month battle with cancer had been fought in absolute privacy. And suddenly, Blackstar's meaning became devastatingly clear. Every lyric, every musical choice, every visual element of the album and its music videos had been created by a man who knew he was dying, who transformed his own death into art. The album instantly became more than music. It became a final gift, a conscious farewell, a meditation on mortality from someone staring directly at it. For years, the story of Boom's meeting with Emma remained secret, known only to the Richardson family and Visconti. But in 2019, 3 years after Boom's death, and 4 years after Emma's, Sarah Richardson decided the story should be told. She contacted a documentary filmmaker working on a project about Blackstar's creation and agreed to share her daughter's letter to Boomie, the photograph from the studio, and the details of that November afternoon. The revelation stunned everyone who heard it. Here was David Bowie, facing his own death, using his limited remaining energy, not just to create his final album, but to give comfort and connection to a dying teenager who'd reached out in desperation. It exemplified something essential about who Bowie was, beyond the fame and the music and the legendary reinventions. He was someone who understood suffering, who'd battled his own demons throughout his life, who recognized a kindred spirit when he encountered one. Tony Visconti, when interviewed about that day, spoke with deep emotion. "I worked with David for 4 decades. I saw him at his highest peaks and lowest valleys, the Ziggy years when he was becoming a superstar, the cocaine-fueled station-to-station era when he nearly destroyed himself, the Berlin recovery period, the commercial success of Let's Dance, the experimental years, all of it. But what he did for Emma Richardson in November 2015, in the middle of recording his own farewell album while fighting excruciating pain, that showed me the real David, not the performer, not the icon, but the human being. He gave that girl hours of his remaining time, shared music with her that nobody else had heard, validated her experience, gave her comfort in her final weeks, and he asked for nothing in return except privacy. That's who David Bowie truly was. The story of Emma and Bowie's meeting added another layer to Blackstar's legacy. The album was already considered a masterpiece of artistic courage, a conscious farewell unlike anything in music history. But knowing that during its creation, Bowie had taken time to connect with a dying fan, to share the work with someone who truly understood its meaning, made it even more profound. Today, both David Bowie and Emma Richardson are gone. He died on January 10, 2016, 10 days after Emma's death on New Year's Eve 2015. Two people who'd connected across the gulf of fame and circumstance, understanding each other in the most fundamental way possible, as fellow travelers approaching the same destination. The photograph from that November afternoon in Magic Shop Studios was finally released in 2020, 4 years after Bowie's death. It shows a 68-year-old icon and a 16-year-old fan, sitting together on a studio couch, both smiling despite the sadness both carried, connected by something deeper than music, deeper than fame, deeper than the usual relationship between artist and audience. It's a photograph about recognition, about two people seeing each other clearly, stripped of pretense and performance, simply two humans facing mortality together. Emma's mother, Sarah, established a foundation in her daughter's name, working with seriously ill teenagers who love music, helping them connect with artists when possible, using music as therapy and comfort during treatment. The foundation has worked with dozens of musicians over the years, facilitating meetings and experiences that give sick kids moments of joy and connection during their darkest times. Sarah often tells Emma's story at fundraising events, explaining how David Bowie's compassion in his own final months inspired the foundation's mission. David showed us that even when you're fighting your own battle, you can still reach out to help someone else fight theirs, Sarah says. That's what we try to do. Give kids facing death something beautiful to hold on to, just like David gave Emma. The CD Bowie gave Emma that day, the pre-release copy of Blackstar with his handwritten label, was donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2021. It sits now in a climate-controlled display case, alongside the photograph and Emma's original letter to Bowie, part of an exhibit about the Blackstar era. Museum visitors stop at that display, reading Emma's shaky handwriting, looking at the photograph of two people bonded by mortality, seeing the CD that Bowie held in his own hands and gave to a dying girl weeks before his final album's release. The exhibit doesn't explain everything. Some things about that November afternoon remain private, conversations between Bowie and Emma that were theirs alone. But what's shared is enough to understand the essential truth. David Bowie, in his final months, chose compassion over privacy, connection over isolation, using his remaining time and energy to give comfort to someone who needed it desperately. The story of David Bowie and Emma Richardson is about many things. It's about mortality, obviously. About two people facing death and finding ways to make meaning from that facing. It's about art, about how creating something beautiful can help process the most difficult human experiences. It's about connection, about how we find understanding in unexpected places, across differences of age and fame and circumstance. But more than anything, it's about who David Bowie truly was when stripped of performance and persona, when facing the ultimate ending, when nothing remained but to be simply, fully human. For 50 years, David Bowie had been a master of reinvention. Ziggy Stardust, the alien rock star who'd come to save Earth. The Thin White Duke, aristocratic and cold. The Berlin experimentalist, the Let's Dance pop star. Each persona carefully crafted, each transformation calculated to surprise and challenge and push boundaries. Fans and critics spent decades trying to figure out who the real David Bowie was behind all those masks, whether there even was a real David beneath the performance. The meeting with Emma revealed the answer. The real David Bowie was someone who read a letter from a dying teenager and cried. Someone who, while fighting his own terminal illness and trying to complete his final artistic statement, took 3 hours to sit with a scared 16-year-old girl and tell her that death could be transformed into something meaningful. Someone who shared music that nobody else had heard, who held a stranger's hand, who recognized suffering and responded with compassion. That was the real David Bowie. Not Ziggy, not the Duke, not any of the characters he'd played. Just a man who understood pain because he'd experienced plenty of his own, who understood fear because he'd fought his demons throughout his life, who understood mortality because he was staring directly at it, and who chose in his final months to use that understanding to help someone else. Tony Visconti said something in a 2020 interview that captures this perfectly. People always ask me what David was really like. They want to know if he was actually as cool and mysterious and otherworldly as his personas suggested. And I tell them he was sometimes, but he was also just a person. A person who could be insecure and scared and sad, who made mistakes and had regrets, who struggled with addiction and mental health and all the messy human stuff we all struggle with. But what made David special wasn't the performances or the music or the fame. It was moments like the one with Emma, when he simply showed up as himself and gave someone what they needed. That's who he was. That's the David I'll remember. Understanding Boom's meeting with Emma also changes how we hear Blackstar. The album was already powerful as a conscious farewell, an artist creating his own eulogy with full awareness and intention. But knowing that during its creation, Boom was processing not just his own death but also connecting with Emma about hers, knowing that he gave her an advance copy and encouraged her to let the music keep her company in her final weeks, adds another dimension to every song. Lazarus, with its opening line, "Look up here, I'm in heaven," wasn't just about Boom's impending death. It was also about Emma, about all the people who die young, about the transformation that happens when we leave physical form. I can't give everything away. The album's closing track takes on new meaning too. Boom was keeping secrets, yes, but he was also acknowledging that some experiences, some connections, some moments are too sacred to fully explain. His time with Emma was one of those moments. The music videos for Blackstar became even more poignant in light of this hidden story. The Lazarus video, featuring Boom's bandaged and confined to a hospital bed, writing frantically, then standing and backing into a dark wardrobe, was filmed just weeks after the meeting with Emma. Boom was processing both their experiences, creating visual metaphors for the journey they were both taking. The wardrobe he disappears into at the video's end became a symbol, death as a doorway, a transformation, a stepping from one room into another unknown space. Not scary, just different, just the next stage. That was what he tried to explain to Emma in the studio, and what he was now explaining to the world through his art, using his final moments of creative energy to transform fear into understanding. David Bowie died on January 10, 2016, at 7:30 a.m., at his apartment in New York. His wife Iman was with him. So was his daughter Alexandria and his son Duncan Jones. He died peacefully. Pain managed by medication, surrounded by love, having completed his final album and seen it released to the world 2 days earlier. His death became international news instantly. Tributes pouring in from around the globe. Millions of people mourning a man who'd soundtracked their lives for 5 decades. But in a small hospital room in Southampton, England, Sarah Richardson sat beside her daughter's empty bed, 10 days after Emma had died on New Year's Eve, and felt a strange sense of connection to the grief sweeping the planet. She knew something most of those mourners didn't know. David Bowie had died only 10 days after her daughter. Two people who'd understood each other perfectly, who'd shared that November afternoon talking about death and art and transformation, had completed their journeys within days of each other. Sarah thought about the last time she'd seen Emma alive. New Year's Eve afternoon, Emma drifting in and out of consciousness, Blackstar playing softly on repeat in the hospital room. Emma had whispered something then, her final words, so quiet Sarah had to lean close to hear. "Tell David thank you. Tell him I understand now. It's beautiful." Emma died 2 hours later, peacefully, without struggle, Lazarus playing as she took her final breath. Sarah had wanted to contact Bowie somehow, to let him know, to tell him that Emma's last thoughts had been of gratitude for their meeting. But she'd honored the privacy agreement, hadn't reached out, assumed she'd find a way eventually to pass on Emma's message. Then 10 days later, Bowie was gone too, and Sarah realized the message didn't need to be passed on. Somehow, she felt certain he already knew. 9 years have passed since that November afternoon in Magic Shop Studios. Both David Bowie and Emma Richardson are gone. Their physical presence is ended, their final transformations completed. But what they created together in those 3 hours remains. It remains in Sarah Richardson's memory, in the foundation she built honoring her daughter's love of music. It remains in Tony Visconti's telling of the story, in his insistence that people understand who David Bowie truly was beyond the fame. It remains in the photograph now displayed in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Two people smiling at each other across the gulf of mortality, connected by understanding. It remains in Blackstar itself, an album that means more when you know the full context of its creation. And it remains in the example Bowie set, that even when facing our own ending, we can reach out, we can connect, we can use our remaining time and energy to help someone else bear their burden. That's David Bowie's final gift. Not just the music, though the music is extraordinary, not just the artistic courage of turning his death into art, though that courage is remarkable, but the compassion, the humanity, the choice to see a suffering stranger and respond with love instead of turning away. In our modern world, where celebrity often means isolation behind walls of security and publicity teams, where fame creates distance between artists and audiences, Bowie's final act was to bridge that distance completely. He let a dying fan into his private space, shared his unfinished work, held her hand, cried with her, gave her comfort. He made his own suffering smaller by acknowledging hers. He transformed what could have been a lonely, frightening death into something meaningful for both of them. So yes, David Bowie was Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, the Berlin experimentalist, the Let's Dance pop icon. He was all those personas and more, a chameleon who spent 5 decades reinventing what a rock star could be. But he was also the man who read a letter from Emma Richardson and decided that meeting her mattered more than his privacy, his pain, his final reserves of energy. He was the artist who understood that his last transformation shouldn't be a solo performance but a shared experience, a connection with someone else facing the same journey. He was the human being who looked at death approaching and chose compassion over fear, generosity over self-protection, love over isolation. That's who David Bowie really was. And that's why 9 years after his death, we're still discovering new reasons to admire him, still finding new layers of meaning in his final work, still learning from the example he set right up until his very last days. Emma Richardson wanted to meet David Bowie one final time before she died. She got her wish, but David Bowie got something too, a reminder of why he'd made music for 50 years, a connection with someone who truly understood what he was trying to say in his final album, a chance to give comfort to someone who desperately needed it. Their meeting wasn't one-sided. It was mutual, reciprocal, two people giving each other gifts in their final days. Emma gave Bowie validation and meaning. Bowie gave Emma understanding and peace. And together they showed the world what really matters at the end of all our lives. Not fame, not achievement, not the things we've accumulated or the personas we've performed, but the connections we've made, the kindness we've shown, the love we've shared. That's the legacy. That's what remains. That's David Bowie's final transformation, from icon to human, from star to friend, from performer to companion on the universal journey we all must take. And it's beautiful, sad but beautiful, just like he told Emma it would be. If this story moved you, if you learned something about David Bowie you never knew, consider sharing it with others who love his music and want to understand the man behind the legend. And remember, we all have chances to show compassion, to reach out to someone suffering, to make someone's burden a little lighter. David Bowie, even while dying, even while completing his final masterpiece, even while managing extraordinary pain, took that chance when Emma Richardson reached out. What would the world look like if we all did the same? Subscribe to discover more untold stories about the artists who shaped our world. Because behind every icon, there's a human story worth knowing.